helps if you turn on your microphone. Welcome, it's Sunday morning and it's Art of Rock o'clock or something like that. This is made possible by Angelspit's Patreon. And you're going to join us every Sunday morning here at this time, watching it on Twitch or YouTube or whatever. And as I said, it's the amazing Angelspit's Patreon who helped make this happen. Many of the Angelspit Patreon humans are here, and we're all keeping each other going. And even if you're not an Angelspit Patreon person, you're welcome to join up. Here's Eric, and join us here or join us wherever, because life's good. Eric, welcome. Angelspit's got a new album out. It's called Diesel Priest. People don't hate it, which is good. Apparently their neighbors hate it, which is very good. Go check it out. You'll like it. I spent a lot of time on the lyrics. God damn, I spent a lot of time on those lyrics and on the music. And thank you to Art of Rock, because we actually, a lot of the mixes were forged and formed here due to the conversations we had here. Glass Jar is another thing that Angelspit's involved with. It's like this epic 70s sci-fi thing. It's on Kickstarter right now. There's a link. Go click on it. It's really weird, and it's fantastically weird. Speaking of weird and fantastic, here are a whole bunch of tracks you need to know about. That's a Spotify playlist for many of the people who are here. I should actually add a Diesel Priest track to that, and I haven't because I'm a terrible person. But somebody who does add a track to that is the one and only Eric, who's got a new EP out called From Hanging Raven. Click on it because it's awesome. It's bloody good. Vince, you have to give me one of these so I can pimp you as well. Speaking of non-stop music, because we like it non-stop, you need to watch MTV TV, because we're going to stream there afterwards. We're going to raid on over to MTV TV. And if you're in a band and you've got a track, email them. There's their email link. They will play your music, because we are all in this together, and you should pimp them. Mention them on social media, or if you got a couple of bucks a month, support them on Patreon. Support me on Patreon, because running a 24-hour non-stop music channel ain't cheap. So when we're done, we're gonna zoom on over there, right on over there. Welcome to Art of Rock. We talk about rock and roll and music and stuff, and I would actually like to throw the floor open to Vince, because I want to talk about distortion, and Vince knows about distortion, and if this gets technical, we'll throw it to Rob, who knows about technical stuff. Vince, distortion, go.
Things to know about distortion. Distortion alters the wave shape of a signal. So your typical wave shape is, the curved up and down wave. That's just going to be your standard input from at least a guitar signal. Now, whatever you start with from a synthesizer, because I know you can start with a sine wave or a square wave with a synthesizer or not have to start with a standard wave. So you're going to need to keep that in mind when you add distortion, because it's going to change the wave shape. Now, a fuzz is technically actually the heaviest distortion you can get because it's a square wave shape. So if you're looking at distortion options and you want to go as hard as you can, technically fuzz is the hardest distortion you're going to get. This is going to vary depending on pedals and plugins or whatever else you're using, but that's the hardest you're going to be able to find. Standard regular distortion makes not quite a sine wave to a sine wave out of your original signal. So it adds harmonics and broadens the signal, but it doesn't change the wave shape as much. So if you run your fuzz, which is a square wave, and then run an overdrive after it, because an overdrive just broadens the signal a little, that's why it tends to while it's still distorted, it doesn't sound as distorted when you put the overdrive after the fuzz, and it adds more sustain because there's less of the cutoff of the signal intermittently in the wave shape. So it holds out longer through your software or hardware, depending on what you're running it with. I tend to run a sustainer ahead of my distortion whenever I'm doing anything, because it just gives you that much more control over your sustain level. You can turn it down, you can turn the attack down, so it has a delayed starting point, even to an extent, and it gives you more control over the wave shape, really. So that tends to work out well for me. I don't know what people do with synthesizer distortion really, because the only time I use synthesizer distortion is in my DAW. I don't run anything through anything because I don't have an actual synthesizer. I run sound through the Native Instruments machine into the DAW, and then I manipulate it from there. So I don't have an external starting point for sound for anything other than guitar. But I do a lot of adjusting with guitar because there's a lot of adjustment to be done with distortion if you're trying to get a specific sound out of something. And I think your best bet is to have as many distortion options as possible. And it's like kind of a little bit of a gear acquisition syndrome thing, but also in terms of sound manipulation, if you look at distortion pedals as patches for a synthesizer, everyone's going to have a different effect, or a slightly different effect, at least on your sound. So the more options you have, the more adjustments you have, and the more things you can do with sound, no matter what you're running through them. So 1, wave shapes are important with distortion. 2, options are almost equally as important as knowing how the wave shape is going to be altered. And I think that's all I've got right now because I get ranty and then I forget what I was saying. So
okay,
that's where I am right now.
All right, thank you, Brandon. Welcome. Okay, I actually want to throw the floor open here because I know a lot of us have got a lot of questions, and as I was saying before we went on, synth players don't have a clue about distortion. Like, I don't. I know about wave shaping and modular stuff. Something I do want to ask is turning the volume down, because out of a synthesizer it's sort of 0 dB kind of. Then it's got to go into a distortion pedal, which is minus 20 dB, I think, and then modular is plus 20. So there's a whole bunch of volumes. Like if I run a 0 dB thing into a and John, I did see your hand, by the way. If I run a 0 dB into a synth output into a distortion pedal, it sounds awful because it's actually clipping hardcore before it even gets into the distortion. That's probably something I want to cover later. John, you had a question?
It wasn't so much a question. It was, talking about like use of distortion. I currently don't have any distortion pedals. I used to, honestly got rid of it because I was underutilizing it, and also I was doing it basically all digitally. But you mentioned being part of the Native Instruments universe. One of my tools that I use pretty often is Guitar Rig, which is basically, it's their virtual system of distortion pedals, but also effects pedals as well, and you can set up chains through that. And one of the he's dropped off. He did mention that he was having internet troubles, so
keep going.
I'll keep going. So yeah, it's like what I will use it for usually is a warmth, warmth, reverb, and expression, phasing. It's like there's lots of different types of signal manipulations that I use Guitar Rig for. Sometimes it's just like taking an off-the-shelf sound. Disadvantage of a Guitar Rig, especially when you start getting into distortion, is as you start clipping that the sound down, it honestly sounds like a guitar. That can be awesome. That can be exactly what you're going for. Sometimes you just want to add a little bit of shimmer, sometimes you want to add a little bit of wah, and so it kind of depends. But it's like sometimes if I want to have like a nice big lead guitar sound, or even kind of like a rhythm sound, like I'll do it with a synthesizer, and kind of double it, like one that is relatively heavily distorted, and then a second line that is basically mirroring it, but with a cleaner signal. So they kind of play off each other, similar to having like a lead and rhythm guitar, except I'm doing it with synths. So it's like I think they're compatible, but yeah, it's like especially like as you get into the heavier distortion, the more distortion you add, the more it sounds like a guitar. which, if that's what you want, it's fine.
Okay,
Alex, you got here. Sorry.
No, the floor is yours, man. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say I was just gonna throw it to Alex because he had his hand up.
Alex, you heard the man.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, don't forget you can also run distortion in parallel, so you don't have to do it only in inline. So, for example, you could do it in your DAW or in your mixing desk. You can run it in the sound effect. And also keep in mind that often distortion is sort of also compression, because the signal gets a bit squished. So you can use that for your advantage.
Okay, thank you. Eric, can I, you're a bit of a guitar dude. So and Vince, if you want to jump in at any point, because I want to learn from specifically guitarists, so I can go, okay, run it into my synthesizer brain. I mean, like, I want to learn from everybody, not just guitarists, but Eric, I know you, rant to me. Rant, go, distortion.
I don't know how much help I can be, Carl. I honestly, like, I came from a guitar background. I've been playing guitar for 30 years, and I actually don't pick my guitar up often anymore. And I haven't performed with a guitar in maybe a decade. I still pick it up and just fiddle around with it, but recording wise and stuff, pretty much what Vincent said is what I tend to do. And when I used to play live shows with guitar, I was younger too and more experimental. I really didn't know what I was doing. I had several different poor kid guitar pedals I could find at whatever stores, Guitar Center, local guitar shops, and I would literally I would build just a board with phaser and everything on it. I would just mess around with different patch cables through my system and just get different sounds for what I wanted to do. Like I said, it was experimenting. I really didn't know what I was doing. And now I tend to, I do almost everything in box in my computer. So a lot of the stuff's digital, and I still experiment with distortion things and that as well. I like to run a lot of different distortions through a single track of what I'm doing to get a sound. I love distortion. It's probably my favorite effect on anything. I like to put it on just even subtly on vocals and like I said, even inbox now. Even if I do put guitar into my DAW, I don't record a lot of it live. I usually just record it right into it and use effects. The effects nowadays are just insane. As John mentioned, I have Guitar Rig on there. It's probably one of the best you can have that mimics an actual guitar sound if you're going for that distortion thing, and it works well with synthesizers, and you can get it to the point where synths do sound like guitars or fat basses. I found maybe like an organ instrument in it is especially good for guitars. Like it gets a really nice fat and the harmonics you can get out of it is incredible. But that's me ranting. Like I said, I experiment a lot, and until I get something that sounds pleasing to my ear that I really like, and it is my favorite of anything.
All right. I want to ask you another question. John brought up the really cool thing about vocals. I want to include all of this. Alex, your hand is up.
I just want to repeat previous iterations of this get together and say that also the equalizer before and after the distortion has a huge effect on the tone you get. So keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question, if I may. Brendan, welcome again. Great remix, by the way. So you've got distortion, you've got overdrive, you've got saturation, you've got tube, you've got fuzz. Explain. Tell me what these terms mean. You've sort of what's overdrive? Yeah, sure. Please jump in.
I mean, Vincent might be better, or John, at explaining what it is. But from what I've just looking into it and what I've noticed, like Vincent was saying before, fuzz is that's the ultimate. That's the most distorted. You're gonna pull the sound wave, distort the sound wave. Overdrive, I think, is just adding that little bit of extra. I don't, like I said, I'm not technically, don't know the exact technical terms, but that gets it a little more distorted. Saturation just adds that warmth to it, and gets more harmonics out and makes it sound fuller. What were the other ones?
Well, wave shaping.
Yeah.
It's a distortion, fuzz, overdrive, and something else.
Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, how would you use them? How would you use them in a synthesizer?
I think like I don't know. Is my mic on? I can't.
Yeah, you're
know if
on.
anyone can hear me.
I can
Oh,
hear you.
hi everybody. But just back to overdrive real quick. I think the main function of overdrive is to basically like try to mimic the sound of like tube amp just being pushed to the point where the sound starts to break up. So that's kind of the effect that seems to be going for. Is like if you're looking for super hardcore distortion and you plug into like a there's like an overdrive pedal or like a tube scream or something, like it just doesn't, you're like, I walk away disappointed from that because I was expecting big rock distortion sound, but it's more of a just pushing whatever amp into the point of breakup where you start to get that crackle and get those nice harmonics and whatnot.
All right, cool. So if I can then ask, and Rob, this might be a question that you also have an input into, is that soft synths aside and digital realm aside, because it's just plug it in the digital realm, if you're actually going from a synthesizer into a distortion pedal, apparently there's a swap change in impedance. And apparently, like, beside it being 20 decibels worth of difference, I've noticed it. Well, like, when I come out of the Emax into the pedals, I have to pad it down 20 dB. And the problem I get there is that the Emax has noise, because it's from 1985. The noise floor is here. And when I bring it down 25 dB, that noise floor suddenly gets a lot louder. So I'm going into a DI, our DI rack, dropping everything like down 21 decibels, and that seems to do the trick. But you've mentioned impedance. Oh, I've mentioned impedance, and so Rob, rant to me about impedance.
Okay. So most people know impedance. They think of impedance as resistance, but there's two parts of impedance. One is the resistance, and one is reactance. So if you've got a resistor, it's basically stopping current flow or reducing current flow. It's slowing current flow down. If you've got reactance, it's relative to resistance. It's not a pure thing that you can measure easily. But reactance is really when phase comes into play. So if you put in a coil or an inductor in series with a resistor, or if you put in a capacitor, it will still create relative resistance, but it'll change the phase. So impedance in general is a combination of resistors, coils, and capacitors together, creating a resistance value, an effective resistance value of impedance that changes by the frequency that you're putting in, and the capacitor and inductor values that you use are also essentially tuning to a frequency range as well. So if you think about if I'm taking some water into a pump and I'm pumping that water, it's going to squirt out the other side of the pump at that rate. So essentially a capacitor is building up water pressure, and then it's spilling over and pumping out the other side. Whereas a resistor, it's just a tighter tube, and the water is trying to get through there. It's got to go faster through this narrower diameter tube to get all that water through. But a capacitor is also creating resistance by building up a bowl, if you like, of water, and then as it reaches capacity, it's going to burst over and push. And that pulse rate of the water flow or the current coming into that bowl and then popping over to the other side of the capacitor over electric field jump that sets a frequency. So your resistance over an RC circuit is called impedance or reactance because it's got an element in there that's also resisting current flow, but it's decided by time what that resistance is. And usually reactance is an AC, like an alternating current thing, but it happens in DC circuits too, because your frequencies that you're sending through the amplifier or the filter or the overdrive or the distortion pedal will be impacted in that same fashion. What that means is that your guitar pedal is designed for a certain flow of current coming in. And that pedal is designed typically to get the current flow from a guitar pickup, which is low impedance. But when you mismatch the impedance of a pedal to like a synth, which is more active gain, it's pushing out a lot more power, it's going to overload. The pedal will overload because your signal, your voltage levels will be higher than what it's designed to intake. And so it's almost like imagining a sprinkler and you turn on the water and the hose itself starts to expand at the hose clamp, and there's water spraying out the side of the hose, and it's saying, what are you doing to me? You should have far less water coming through the sprinkler. I can't keep up. And what that means is you get loss. It becomes lossy. So you'll lose signal quality, you'll lose power. If it's a transformer, it'll lose efficiency. And sometimes that efficiency is lost in an electrical field emission that is in the audible spectrum. So you'll hear a beep kind of noise coming out of your equipment saying, what am I doing wrong here? I'm overloading my equipment. It's bursting at the seams. The water analogy is a simple view, but it works because it's understandable. The trick is to slow the flow rate down, and try to match them. And not all pedals are the same impedance. Most of them are 50 to 100 ohm devices. And to your point, Carl, knocking down the power factor or the ratio of signal strength with a like a DI box. I've got one of these gadgets here. It's got the 20 dB blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And that's an attenuator, right? So that's going to reduce the signal coming out of the synth going into the guitar pedal. Or another way to do it is to run the synth through a mixing desk and then use a volume control or a level control, either as a send, which is I think was what Alex was talking about, having a send effects channel which you can control, or just run it through the desk itself and just pull the master down and feed that into, or patch it into another channel.
Thank you. So it's like if running it through, because it's funny, I have a Behringer rack. One of the few things Behringer make that's good. And it's one of those 8. It's exactly like yours, but it's 8. So does it also fix the impedance problem, or is it best to go out of synthesizers into that DI?
It depends on the pedal, and it depends on the impedance of the pedal that you're using. And what you'll have to do is, if I do it, I plug it into an oscilloscope and I look at the waveform, and I will reduce the gain or the level until I see a clean signal. But if you're running it through a distortion pedal, you're purposely destroying the signal quality. So it's like you're introducing more factors into the distortion effect by overdriving it into the distortion pedal. So you're effectively, if I was a guitar instead of a synth, Carl is effectively plugging in an overdrive pre-distortion pedal by having that synthesizer plugging in, because he's got far too much power than that pedal was designed for. So you can do a basic attenuation, which all a slider or a pot is just resistance value.
Right.
But you could you could get tricky and use an RC circuit like an L pad with a capacitor in it and vary the capacitor. And what you're going to do is you're only going to apply the resistance to a certain frequency band. That would be like running the synth through an EQ and then running the EQ into the pedal and mucking around with all the bands and finding out where is my sweet spot and where is that noise, by the way, in the Emax. Is that 1.5K? Because I'm dropping that right down. I'm gonna expect that everything is at the same level, but I'm gonna pull that noise level down. So, and I'd be looking on a scope out of the EQ to clean up that waveform before it goes into the pedal, and then use your ears as you come out of the pedal.
All right.
That would be the approach that I would take.
Okay, cool. Thank you, man. That's really good. Thank you. I want to throw it. John brought up, unless anybody else has a question, John brought up a really nice one about using distortion on vocals. Oh no, Vince, I see your hand. Go.
Okay. I wanted to hit something you mentioned a little bit ago, but my internet was screwed up, so I couldn't write that. The wave shape for overdrive. This is your example.
Love it.
That's what it does to your signal.
No, hold it up. 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 Hold on. Okay, just leave it there. Okay. So distortion makes it more triangular.
Yes.
All right, crazy. Thank you.
It may not be entirely a sine wave, but it gets closer to that with distortion.
Yeah.
Up to that, depending on how hard it is.
Distortion is a deterioration in the signal based on it's the hysteretic value of the transistors that are in the unit. So you're purposely pushing components to their max and in introducing error or degradation of signal quality. That's what distortion is. Distortion is not a music thing. Distortion is actually a side effect of really overdriving a transistor. And so the transistor has a certain frequency response. The moment you start pumping signals into that transistor and it's like maxing out and freaking out and its head's exploding, basically you're losing efficiency in that transistor. And when you lose efficiency, that energy, that power is separated from that nice sinusoidal, and you're getting down to pieces and chunks and fragments that are left because you've been breaking the shit out of that signal through overdriving a transistor.
Okay, so therefore,
technically,
it's yours. Go.
Technically, overdrive, distortion, and fuzz are all distortion.
Mm-hmm.
They're all forms of distortion, but they put different labels on different ones because they affect sound differently.
Right. I mean, if you fuzz, you're essentially chopping your sinusoidal wave right off.
Yeah.
Okay, so novice guy here. Therefore, anything that is harmonically rich would be probably better for distortion, or like I'm talking about drums, and because if I run drums through fuzz, they just go, they lose their definition and everything else. But when I run it through distortion specifically and overdrive, because this is the core of this conversation, I guess, is if you're using drums, go-to is overdrive, or is it distortion? If it's a pad, perhaps your go-to or a bass line is fuzz. You see what I'm getting at here? Like,
if you're going to run drums through a fuzz, put an overdrive after the fuzz and a limiter before the fuzz, or a noise reducer. So you can fine-tune things to get more definition out of the drums with the distorted sound. However, by putting an overdrive after the fuzz, you're almost reintroducing the triangular wave shape, or trying to reform it back to the triangular wave shape. So either just use an overdrive or just use a distortion would probably be a better option for ease of
Okay.
That's the word I'm looking. I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is there. You get what I'm saying, kind of.
Yeah.
I hope.
Rose, welcome. So therefore, just to tie it into to possibly where we're the next rabbit hole we're going to go into, what's good on vocals?
I haven't figured that out yet. That's part of the reason I haven't recorded any vocals for myself.
Okay. John, thanks for wearing the hoodie, and I'm so glad you got it. Do you want to take the floor for a moment or a day, talk about vocal distortion?
No, because I want to learn. And honestly, because it's like, because I see other acts running what they do through distortion and fuzz, and also other types of manipulation, and it's like some of it I see like giving it a harsher edge. Some of it is like I hear like it's like, okay, that's a chorus, that's a phasing effect. It's like there's some kind of fuzz it's like happening, but like I'm trying to break down what that chain is, and I haven't other than like just straight up like doing it. And whenever I try to do it myself, and this is one of the reasons why this conversation is great, is like it comes out sounding really, really thin. And so it's like, oh, okay, so that's when I'm using overdrive improperly and not looking at, say, fuzz that will emphasize harmonics. So it's like, okay, so but this is me like learning and also asking like, what is effective? Alex, you've got your hand up, like take it.
Yeah, I have little experience, but what I know what some people do is either, as I said before, parallel distort, then also it's not strictly distortion, but some people vocode noise and mix it to the voice.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I have got to deal with a cat. I'll be right back. Please go. And John, if you want to rule the floor, because you're doing such a great job. Guys, keep doing your magic. Go.
Yeah, and one thing some people also do is like only distort certain bands. That's what I know.
When you say distort certain bands, how are you doing that routing?
There are either special plugins like multi-band compression, but for distortion. So you can put certain distortion on certain bands and dial the level in. And also you can just band pass it and then distort it, like in a cent or so.
Right on. Rob, you got your hand up.
Yeah, from my point of view, I don't normally apply effects in line with my vocal recording, so I'll record it dry or clean, and I might have something in parallel. But normally, the difficulty with vocals is that it's a very broad range of levels depending on your microphone technique. If you're singing loudly and softly and you're this far away from the microphone, then those levels are going to be handled differently through distortion, because if you're going to try to clip or overdrive, it's only going to take the higher signal levels and work harder on those signal levels. So you're going to deteriorate part of the vocal line. If you use compression, you'll bring those levels into a common range, and then you can jack that up higher and then apply distortion more consistently across all of your voice. If you use modulation on the voice, it's essentially doing it's compressing, and then it's applying a waveform to your voice consistently, all at the same level. So that's why modulation techniques are typically used, because they take away all that hardness for you. You don't have to go and do it manually. But if you think about it in that terms, like if I sing loud and then soft, those levels are going to proportionally be impacted by distortion very differently. And if somebody sings up really close to the microphone and purposely overloads the mic, then actually all of the vocals are going to be at a common high level, and then the distortion's most likely going to work quite well consistently on those vocals because you're constantly riding the microphone. And the difference is when you're riding the microphone, it's introducing clipping and shit basically, and that can be desirable. If you're pulling away from the microphone, you're getting a lot more harmonics from your voice into the recording, but you would have to use a lot of compression to bring them all up to a level where you can then apply effects consistently across that. So I think there's two different techniques, and you've got to be mindful that the proximity that you have to the mic and the gain that you've got on your mic actually makes a big difference.
No, that's fantastic and super insightful. Is like my reflection there is like, compress or find a way to even out the signal before applying distortion and other effects in order to have a more equal distribution. All right, order of hands was Eric and then Rose.
Yeah, to continue on with what Rob was saying, an easy way to, instead of singing loud and soft and having that, is like having those different parts. I'm not talking about live, but actually recording, is you just record those parts separately, so you don't have such a dramatic wave file going extreme and then small and soft. And also record dry all the time, unless you put reverb or something on it a little bit. Because if you don't have a good vocal track going into it, it's not going to sound good no matter what you do to it. And when you're adding the distortion to it, what I tend to do, and I don't use distortion on my vocals all the time, more of like just to add a little extra to it if you need it. And I just barely put it on. I never use a fuzz effect. And it makes sense now. Vincent's chart was awesome. Like that fuzz effect with the square to make your vocals like that, I never use because it kind of distorts it, in my opinion, or my ears, to the point where you can't understand what people are saying anymore because it's so distorted. For me, it doesn't work. I like to use a little like overdrive or just distortion or stuff like that on it. But yeah, and if you're singing, and like what Rob was saying to you, to touch on it, if it all depends on what microphone you're using, your singing style, where you are from the mic, how your vocals are, the waveform from them is all gonna, your voice itself is all gonna have a different effect on the way you use distortion on vocals. And not everything, again, it's like anything else with EQing or compression or limiting, not everything has a one-time answer. It depends on what that waveform is, how your voice sounds, what equipment you're using is going to affect everything completely different. And even the way you sing certain parts is going to be different. Like you can, but like if you have a chain for distortion and you use it on your vocals for a certain style you're doing, it should always be around that, but it's not going to work for everything you're doing. And that's why I was recommending, if you're screaming or you're doing more aggressive vocals, it's better when you're recording to record that segment separately than if you're going back soft. Some people like to just record the whole song live, but you're going to have more post-production work to fix those vocals at the end, as opposed to just doing each part separately. It's much easier. And then I also recommend, instead of just compressing all your vocals with stuff, and I mentioned this before, using automation for it, or because I like to torture myself, go in and cut and splice everything to make my vocals, it's more natural sounding, to bring certain levels up and certain levels down on the track itself by just cutting and dropping and bringing volumes up. For me, it sounds more natural and easier on the ears.
Thank you. And thanks, John. Thanks so much for, you should do this more often. John, please. Rose is waiting. Can I be next?
Rose, please.
Okay. Hey, what's up? I think you got some really great advice already from Rob and Eric. when I first started doing music, I was always looking for like that magical distortion that would like be the perfect one. And what I found was that that the distortion, that what I really ended up doing was all of my screams and vocals and stuff like that that are very harsh. Those are all me. I don't use any effects to create those. I went and I studied a lot of technique for metal screamers, you know, like Chris Leapy, Zenna Screaming, stuff like that I've mentioned before in the past. I think it's super important because that way, whether it's recorded or whether it's live, you'll still be able to produce the same sound. You don't have to worry about if your pedal craps out on you or whatever. You know, you don't have to worry about maybe, you know, disappointing people when you go from, you know, the studio to the live show and people are like, yo, where were those beastly screams that I heard? I thought that, you know, I thought I came for this and I didn't get it. You know what I mean? Like I thought that they could scream, you know? So I think really the best thing is proper vocal technique. It's really, really super important if you're going to do that kind of sound. You really should do that because you have to protect your anatomy, because screaming incorrectly will fuck up your anatomy and you will have to have surgery, you know what I mean? Like to fix it. And it might not even get fixed by that, you know? So it's super, super, super important. If you want to do that kind of sound, there is a way to do that sound in a safe way. There are like warm-up exercises that you can do. And if you're not achieving the sound in your head, you know, like you have a sound in your head that you want to emit and that's not happening for you, then that means it's time to go back to the drawing table and like work on that. That being said, I have had a little bit of success with like vocal effects pedals. I use the Voice Live Play, and you know, sometimes I'll just like scroll through and I'll just like play around and see like which ones, you know, and that pedal, I use it in recording and I use it live because it's made for using it live. It's a nice, sturdy, solid pedal. You know, it's made by TC Helicon, and it's a great pedal. So that way you can achieve your sound that's in the studio, you know, whatever you're using there, make sure it's something that you can use live as well. You know what I mean? Otherwise it's going to be kind of a bummer for people that are, you know, expecting X sound and then they get Y sound and they're like, I thought I was going to see this. You know what I mean? Yeah, great advice all around. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Rose. If I may, Rob, one thing I love to do is I'll also put stuff through the Helicon, and then I'll make it huge, beefy, big beefy things. Stuff that goes through the Helicon is usually hot around 400, so I'll EQ the crap out of that. But I'll also get my raw voice and just put compression. Actually, you know what? I don't compress it, but after this conversation, it's like I'm gonna start compressing my voice more. I set it on top with a shitty plugin Distortion. Another amazing thing to do, which I've mentioned before, is having going through a vocoder and vocoding noise, and then applying distortion. Something that I'm learning here is that different types of distortion are radically different. They are as radically different as a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, and a notch filter. That's what I'm learning today. Thank you. That fuzz doesn't sound good on voice, but maybe overdrive and distortion does sound good on voice. Fuzz is going to sound better on these certain things, because I got two Muff Pi fuzz pedals because I went, and what I'm using them for, they're just... Sustain doesn't really work well on clanging synthesizers either. Overdrive, distortion, and I got that metal thing that everyone's pissing their pants about right now. It's all Boss. I fucking love Boss. Crucify me. I love Boss. And they're really cheap and really effective, but I think a problem I'm having is that getting the definition from the bass is hard because they favor those rip your head off like 2K frequencies. So I'm learning about using the filtering, and I'm learning about the balance between the input and the tone. Because the more you input, there's a balance in there for getting the definition out of the sound, yet also having bass thud. Because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is bass thud. Back to vocals, distorting noise is fantastic. It has nothing to do with vocals. What am I talking about? Like if you take a sound, a tone, and actually have a chunk of noise, put that noise through a band pass filter, so it's only letting a band through. So that band is actually playing whatever the frequency is in the noise. And then you also put a VCA on that, so it's opening and closing that noise at the same frequency as the band. So it sounds like the band, that band frequency, is playing the noise. Then you put that into a distortion pedal. And it's, if you do it right and it defines the sound, it's a great sound. But I'm still learning. Like someone, Grim, commented in the box in the comments that the Gasoline Invertebrate track "Let the Demon Out," because I know Brian's got a little green pedal, and ISO something, I can't remember whatever the brand is, but it's like that's the fucking thing he uses on everything, and it sounds great. But it's going from the digital realm, the volume of the digital realm into the volume of the pedal, then dealing with all of the noise and crud it creates, because there's a lot of noise humming and not so much desired sounds that come out of a distortion pedal as well, pulling that back into the digital and making it sound good in your mix. So yeah, I'm learning that if it's a backing vocal that is like more ethereal, maybe fuzz could be a good thing. In fact, and John, thank you for recommending the Lines community. I've been on there talking to people about distortion, and something that's come out a lot is that reverb then distortion is a mighty good thing. Because when you start distorting reverb, and this isn't so much guitar, this is synth stuff, you get some lovely things. And especially if it's a stereo reverb and you're going to say, well, I'm going to put the left side into distortion pedal X and the right side into distortion pedal Y, you start getting some great things. And then you might put that whole thing through a noise gate. So instead of it just being I like distortion in my there's so many interesting things you can do, and I didn't answer the question, I'm sorry. Rob, save me.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you I think John asked about getting that body in your sound. And body's really tough because our human voices are, usually in a certain frequency range, and getting body into that frequency range can be really hard unless you're a baritone or, it can be difficult, and it's about power. So if you think about the wave, the power inside of that sinusoidal wave is the body. How do you maximize that power to make it impactful and more full? And there are, I would say, I'm going to make up some terminology here. I'm going to say that there's a natural sound reinforcement, and there's a synthetic sound reinforcement. So your synthetic sound reinforcement is like using filters and distortion, which is cutting away from your voice, your recognizable sound from your head and your throat and your jaw and your palate. You're starting to chip away with filters, and then you're starting to make it messy and noisy with distortion, and then you might apply some vocoder on it, which is really a synthetic reinforcement. So there's a digital signal processor looking at the signal as it's presented, and it's creating some reinforcement to add artificial body. That's kind of the artificial reinforcement approach. The natural reinforcement approach is focusing on resonance. So resonance is really the voice that you hear in your head that nobody else hears. And it's because the bone structure in your head is resonating at certain frequencies, and you sound a lot more fuller bodied in your head when you sing than that horrible voice that you hate when you hear yourself singing on a tape. And that's because you're missing the natural resonance. And And that's why natural plates and reverbs are normally used in a recording studio to create a reinforcement. So the idea is that your vocal is projected. There becomes a standing wave between you and a reflective surface, and where the microphone is picking up that signal, where both signals are hitting their high point at that standing wave, that's a natural reinforcement, almost like a gain. And you're providing more body, because if there is a delay or a slight mismatch in the phase, those slightly out of phase curves of audio are going to create more body as well. So if you have more and more you at different levels and different levels of either negative or positive phase, you will create a natural resonance, and you'll create more natural sound reinforcement, if that makes sense. So like going into a church and singing into a church, and you get all those echoes and the reverb moving around in there, and where you stand sounds to you from your point of view, but where the microphone is positioned, and if you stay in that one location but move the microphone and keep your headset on, you'll realize that there is probably a great place for you to stand, but then there is an even better place to mic up. And so you got to remember that your ears and your voice projection and where the waves are standing or getting slightly out of phase, you may be missing the best place possible for that to occur. And a lot of people like singing in the shower because you've got tiles and they're high density and they reflect frequencies that are maybe similar to what they like listening to in their own voice. Or maybe it's you know, a dank and dusty basement where you get your best vocals. Getting that natural reinforcement is what I would say is more recognizable to your audience, is your natural voice reinforced, rather than going down a full distortion level like Rage Against the Machine, where if you were standing right next to him and he was singing to you, you would probably say, yeah, I know that's him, but it doesn't sound the same as what's on his recordings. And why is that? It's because he's overloading his mic and blah, blah, blah. But you get the picture. Positive or natural sound reinforcement, and then the synthetic, which is using things like the Extreme Live, the Helicon TC. I love that machine. I've got one. It's awesome. And it's really good synthetic augmentation, because it's using a very high-speed digital signal processor to intelligently build that reinforcement for you, so you don't have to go find that special room to record in.
Good stuff. Thank you, man. Eric!
Caro! So, to touch on what Rob said too, the body in your voice is different in your head outside because of resonance. One of the things you can do also to make your voice sound fuller in your recording is, I'm getting sidetracked. There's something else I want to say too, is to double your vocals or triple them, but not necessarily just duplicate the tracks, because then you're going to get cancellation. But re-record your, if it sounds thin, do a backing track of the same thing in a different octave, or do it in the same octave and then change it in the semitones to make it sound different. Just change stuff around and have that there. And it doesn't need to be in the forefront, or do 2 tracks behind your main one. And again, it doesn't have to be forefront. People don't even need to hear that it's there. But if you have that and then you pan it, you know, 20, 25, 30 left and right, or even keep it in the middle, just do some tricks like that, different pans and different ones. It does, like I said, it doesn't even have to be the forefront of what people are going to hear, but it will add that extra body to your voice to make it sound fuller and better. Also, cut when you're EQing your voice, which you should always do, because the voice is, you pretty much, human voices pick up the whole spectrum of an EQ. You'll go from thick, bassy, muddy stuff to the high stuff. You have cut your vocals around whatever. People's voices are different, but like I usually cut mine at 150, just a hard cut off. So that takes up and will take away a lot of that muddy, boomy stuff that mixes in with your bass and your kick. And if you cut that out of your voice, make your go more towards the mid to high range in your vocals, it'll sound a lot cleaner also. And then, like I said, double them. And then going back into distortion with it, I like to, like, even if you're doing the verse or chorus, whatever you're doing, and you're doing your main vocal, and you don't want distortion on your main vocal, you like it clean, sometimes add a little boost or body behind that is to do that double or triple, like a backing vocals of doing the same thing, and then add a little distortion to those. And like Carl was saying before with the reverb, distortion after reverb sounds amazing. I like to put distortion after, usually after my chain or whatever I'm doing. Distortion's always the last one on that. After compression, after limiting. I don't limit vocals really, but like after doing your chain, even if you have anything else you're doing with it, I like to put the distortion at the end, because it just takes the whole signal of that chain then and just distorts the whole thing. And it, to me, sounds better. It blends it together nicely and it sounds more professional. And you don't have to do it that way, but like sometimes if you have a distortion in the middle of a chain or after certain parts, and then you put something else after it, I mean, it obviously changes the order and makes it sound completely different. And sometimes that's not the effect you're really going for. I find the distortion at the end kind of ties your chain together and makes it sound complete, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I want to pick up on that, but first, here's a message from Grim.
Hey, so the running gag in a lot of films is like when you see the boom mic operator, you know, holding the stick, and then all of a sudden the mic comes in and bops somebody or whatever. It could be a royal pain in the ass, but think about the mic positioning and think about when you're recording, because that might make a vast difference. There's usually at least like a 12-inch lead between at its closest is 12 inches from that boom mic or that, you know, cardioid condenser mic to the actor or actress, right? So you may find that a mic positioning that's more like up and at an angle can help, or maybe one that's even like what they call booming from below, where they're holding the mic up. I don't know, that might help, you know, for a little bit more dynamic range, like Eric was talking about, if you're trying to get it from different, you know, different areas and trying to marry it together to help your process. And the second thing would be more of a question, and it's just from people's experience. I don't know if you guys find or yield better results from like setting something to record in mono by stereo and what the advantages could be. More specifically, if you use like an H4 and a Zoom recorder that usually attaches to that boom, that has that option, but I'm not sure which one is typically better or if it yields better results. That's all I got.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to answer that in a moment. Eric, picking up on what you said, distortion is amazing, especially like if you have a kick drum and you're distorting it, then you put a snare on top of that kick drum. It's a different sound compared to just the snare and just the kick drum. The way distortion takes harmonics, and this is the thing that I'm on about right now. Like, this is what's really blowing my mind, because I am really focusing the current experimentation on the way distortion amplifies, picks up, and accentuates harmonics. And you know, that's why I'm really interested is which of these distortions is, I find fuzz doesn't really do that very well. Distortion does that really well, and overdrive do that. They'll actually say upper harmonics, we're going to turn that into something. And that's the great thing about a drum kit, is that when you've got drums, a drum kit playing through distortion, it's not just, oh, here's, like I said, each sound becomes different because it's built from these different elements, sounds with harmonic content. So when they get distorted, all of those harmonic contents add together and go through that distortion at the same time to produce something new, which is why distorted drums are the best thing in the world. And it's the same thing with your vocals. Like, I need to do this more often. I used to go yell, 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 yell up the top, and then behind it there would be a quiet version of me in a lower voice like this, and then compress them and distort them together. But when you do that, I have to go through the second one and cut it to the syllable to make sure it is absolutely bullet time, sniper tight with that head vocal, so much you don't even hear it. And if you hear it and it's sort of like the words are being knocked out together, when you run that through distortion, it's going to be a mess. Aaron, in answer to your question, mono. Mono, 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 mono. Everything is mono. Unless the synthesizer is drastically, obviously stereo, then yes. If it's a guitar, if you're miking up a guitar, sure. One mic at the cone and one mic at the wall. If you're doing a reverb, like a real reverb in a room that you find, one mic back there, one mic back there. But if you're going to do it like Bowie and Eno, your vocal is mono. Because when you start, my God, when you start recording stuff in stereo, you're opening a can of worms that is phasing and all of this stuff. And whenever I get a recording that's stereo, I will take the left track and I will then only take the left track. I don't combine them. I only take the left track and then throw the right track away, compress, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it sounds like meat, which is the wrong thing to say. It sounds like rocks. No, maybe one rock. Maybe the boulder from Indiana Jones that's going through the tunnel and he's running. That's what the vocals have to sound like. That's the third Indiana Jones reference this weekend. There's Shaya. Eric, help me.
Yeah, jumping on with Carl. Always record in mono. Unless you're doing in-box or your synthesizer has a specific stereo sound where it's panning itself back and forth. It's sending the signal out and splitting it in the stereo. But vocals mono, guitar mono, everything mono, mono, mono. Because if you record in stereo, you're gonna have a lot of issues later on trying to fix stuff. And there are plugins, I'm not sure about hardware, but like plugins and stuff you can use to take stereo stuff and make it into mono as well. But it's lossy and you're gonna lose some of harmonics and stuff you're going for with that. And also you can record the same thing, like I said, with vocals, guitars. I mean, especially guitars. If you're recording guitars, you want at least 2 guitar tracks of the same riff, and then you pan them in stereo to make it sound fatter and wider, and then whatever you want to do with it. But everything is mono, and then when you're in your DAW and you're fixing stuff is when you pan things to make stuff start sounding stereo, or you double it and do different effects and make the stereo stuff. But everything you hear on any track is mono. I had something else I wanted to say and I trailed off, but yeah, mono.
Like my eyebrows. Thank you, Eric. Rob, I saw your hand before. I'm sorry. I'm forgive me. My bad. Rob, the floor is yours.
Now I'm interested to see what John's building. I think it's an IKEA kit on the carpet there. Something.
Alice
like
bypass on a fluorescent light. It's not interesting.
Okay. I watched this really interesting thing on YouTube the other day. It was about vocal doubling, and I'll try to find it and post a link. But the guy was putting like 3 or 4 or 5 doubles of his vocals on. He was shifting the phase a little bit just to give that extra body. And then he was doing an accentuation on top of it. And I can't remember what he called it, but it was like if you're pretending to be the crowd singing, you kind of take that high pitch and you go, and Carl sings like this all the time in all of these in all of these things where he goes, "Hey, Mike, what are you doing?" I mean, it's very light, it's high pitch, it's kind of it's very a little bit of vanilla spice. But what he does is he takes that track and he puts it on top of the doubled vocals. And what it does is quite interesting. It creates some spicy harmonic sound to your vocals. So instead of having a lot of body only through the voice doubling, he puts that
falsetto,
but it's more of an emulation of what the crowd's singing. That's the way he describes it. And he does it by example and lays down this track and does this kind of high pitch, whiny falsetto kind of sound over the top of it. Sounds freaking awesome. And I'd never heard of anyone doing that before. And I thought, yeah, that it's really giving a lot more personal character to the vocal. And it's kind of eerie in a way because it's giving some flavor that you don't normally get out of your general doubled voice recording, if that makes sense.
Did he distort them?
I don't recall. I'd have to go back. I was going to see if I could find the link and post it, but then you put me on the spot. So let me find it.
So just to clarify, does he put basically, like, he's not actually singing falsetto. He's kind of like,
he's pretending to sing.
To be doing it like that.
And the crowd goes, oh, yeah.
Wow.
Like he literally does that as an overlay to his full-on metal or rock voice. And so it's almost like he's doing his own backing vocal, but it's right up front. It's right in your face because it's his voice in the mic singing it right now. So it's not like he's recorded a big crowd. He's pretending to be a crowd singing at that higher pitch, and it just gives us some amazing flavor, some amazing character. I'll dig out the link for you.
That's really interesting. Thank you, man. Once again, I'm inspired. John?
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon the conversation about mono and just like put the huge asterisk of like recording mono versus recording something within a DAW from a soft synth chain or from software instruments. Basically, it's like if you're not dealing with the beat space issues, I mean, you can still have phasing, but a lot of very, very few off-the-shelf software synthesizers are putting out a mono signal. You can squash it down, but I've never had a practical reason to do that. So with that said, every single analog synthesizer that I own is mono, straight up, so completely agree on that, but I just wanted to add that asterisk there.
Cool, thank you. Wow, no one's got their hands up. So if anybody else wants to jump in, discuss this, talk about this. Tumbleweeds are flying across my screen and I don't know what to do. So what about interesting things for... I want to throw this back to Vince. Vince, when you distort on your synthesizers, DAW or practical, what distortion types do you prefer? For drums, for synthesizers, for stuff like that?
For synthesizer stuff, I generally just use what's in my DAW, the standard distortion that came with it, because it doesn't really need a whole lot more than a little bit of push to get it louder at higher frequencies at least, and then I adjust from there. But drums I've done all kinds of things with. It's really fun for me to play around with distortion in drums because I've got a drum machine that I run through the distortion pedals.
Which one?
Just because I can. And I haven't used a whole lot in any music, but I've used it a couple of times and it works out real well if you get it just right. But there's a lot of adjustments to be made to get it to work out so you get a coherent drum track out of it.
That's an interesting conversation in itself. I'm sorry, please going. Please keep going. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Somewhere I've got a photo on. Somewhere I've got a photo on Instagram of the signal chain I used for the drum machine track on the Halalan Flowers remix I did. I can't get to it right now because Instagram's on my phone and I'm using my phone for this right now. But it's there somewhere. It's a ways back because it was back in like February or August of last year, actually, that I posted the picture because that's when I was working on it. But I know I used the compressor sustainer, my Behringer Super Fuzz, and I believe I used the EHX Cran full range overdrive for that. Because the full range overdrive gives you a bass and treble control separately, so I could turn it so that as I was recording, some of the hi-hats or snares hit a little harder. I just turn the knob up a little and turn it back down. It was like operating a DJ set with a drum machine through guitar pedals.
That's great.
But I only had to do it. second because I looped it in the software to put it on the track, so I didn't have to do it the whole time. But yeah, you can get away with fuzz on drums. It's just you got to put something after it to trim the clipping differently. Because if you use just straight fuzz and you crank it up, it takes things apart too much.
This is an interesting point because, like,
yeah.
Sorry. This is really interesting because there's a lot of one wants to hear, or at least I do, definition in drums, and one thing I find exciting about distortion is that you lose that control. Anything that involves me losing control, I get excited about because my brain's all about control and I can't stand it. So when you start going, okay, I'm going to distort the entire drum track, it gets, to me, it becomes a car crash. It's really exciting. Like sometimes I go, well, I won't distort the kick. I'm going to treat it differently. But everything else I'm going to distort. I might, gate it, then distort it or whatever. Yeah, it's really exciting. I guess distortion is exciting still after all these years. Eric.
Yeah, I like to distort drums to add. I do a lot of clean drums. I use a lot of subs and 808s, and I like that sound. Snares are always different. Sometimes it's just noise, and sometimes it's an actual snare. But I like to add the distortion to the drum parts. Usually, I do my kick, snare, cymbals, hi-hats, whatever. Everything's separate tracks. But on some parts, just to add that extra, like you were saying, that car crash, just to throw people off, throw it like in an interlude or going in as a bridge or something else, or your whole song. I prefer to do it just that accented part of a bridge or intro or outro or something, and put the whole drum kit together and then distort it on that and just fuck around with it and just get amazing sounds out of it. You can have the same drum beat in the whole song. If you just change those little bits of it, it makes your song sound different, totally different. Yeah, I enjoy that too.
Awesome, thanks, man. Brendan, welcome. Is it pronounced Brendan?
It's Braden.
Braden, forgive me. Welcome.
No worries.
Spray your knowledge over my face.
I've been for giving things different flavor rather than going to distortions. I've been doing a lot of rediscovered bit crushing, and that just did kind of the playing around with just the bit depth and EQing. I've been just getting crazy sounds, crazy effects on, just completely new, and keyboard riffs, bit crush, resample that, and then I've got a completely new instrument, I think. But it's been working very well on vocals and drums, and also kind of just creating kind of composite lines with those with just different levels of bit crushing. Whereas distortion it just acts completely different dynamically with the sound, and I don't know how that works, but I've been really digging the noises. So,
may I ask you some questions? Is it a software thing or is it a hardware thing? Your bit crusher.
I'm just using the native Redux in Ableton.
So you can automate it.
You can automate it. Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So can you control the bit depth or the sample frequency via an envelope, for example?
I don't see why not. You just draw your envelopes in there constantly.
Okay. I have a modular bit crusher. I've got the Doepfer, and it's bloody amazing. But bit crushers are bit crushers because they're digital, so that doesn't matter. The great thing that I've learnt from this bit crusher is, and you can do this obviously on software versions too, is to treat it like it's a filter. So there is an attack of the sound that is a full sample frequency, and then as it drops down, it's degrading the frequency. And when you start doing this on a bass or a drum or your vocals, it's going to blow your skull. The other stunning thing about there's different types of bit crushing. Like obviously there's the sample rate and the bit rate, but there's different types. Because I've seen different ones where they'll do or they'll apply a logic circuit. And when you start doing that shit, or you start fucking around with like a really low bit rate, you start getting these sounds, these little like what we're getting here. You know, that it's great stuff. Really fun. I'm inspired.
So are you like you said using it like an envelope, like just like it'd be like drawing your own attack transients and reliefs and stuff in there.
You'll probably find that there is an option for that modular thing. That's sexy, Rob. To be modulated. Oh, there you go. For the actual bit rate of it to be modulated. And because a lot of these, Ableton's amazing, and it will have an option for you to actually be firing an envelope into it. So you are shaping your bass line, your guitar, or whatever as an envelope, and you treat it like it's a filter. And then, with a filter, you know how you're like going, wow. You do that with a bit crusher, and your third eye will open. It's like, it's madness. But the thing to remember about a bit crusher is that it can get lost in the mix, and it can also overpower the mix. So my recommendation is when you're doing a lot of bit crushing or there's bit crushing on a main instrument, make sure that there's not too much stuff going on. Because it just doesn't crush the tops, it crushes the bottoms. And when you start doing that in a bass, you get some wonderfully interesting things. That's all I have to say. Was there anything else, Brandon, that you...
Just straight up.
No, I think that was the main source of my joy as of late was the bit crushing.
Okay.
So.
John's showing us. John, does it have the option to be controlling with envelopes?
Yeah, you can route it.
Oh yeah, you can route it. So experiment with that. I thank you. I'm going to. This has left me with so much. I have to play with distortion. I have to bit crush distortion. And I have to play with bit crushes. Alex, thank you, Brandon. Alex, hit me.
You can also do a sort of analog sample rate reduction if you have a sample and hold module and an LFO that's running really fast. And then you basically put your audio through the sample and hold, and the speed of the LFO determines the sample rate. So you can, if you turn it down, you get some nice textures.
That's the truth. Do you Alex, do you use that a lot?
Not really often, but sometimes. But ironically, I only use it in a plugin because I don't have an analog sample and hold module.
Okay.
But it's a good module emulation.
All right. What I think you should do is then run that into a distortion unit. Play around with it and see what happens. I love it. Brilliant. Thank you. Grim.
Hey, so I was plagued by the notion of being like, have I ever heard distorted drums? What the hell does that even sound like? And then I thought about Smashing Pumpkins and Ava Adore. And if I'm not remiss in that presumption, I think that's distorted drums. I don't know what they did to achieve it, but like if you listen to it again, people argue that it's like their worst album or they went from meteoric success to a total fucking shitfest.
Hold on, that was produced by fucking Bond from Nitzareb, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, like, but if you listen to it, like, holy shit, like, even to this day, I still think it holds water. Like, it's bad as shit. Like, the drums on that are really cool. So, I mean, if everybody's looking to get inspired and throw distortion on XYZ, and if you're a fan of drums or this or that, yeah, I would definitely give that another listen because holy shit, man, like, it was freaking cool. And I think it was in an era to where their drummer died or he
went to jail.
Hooked on. Yeah. So yeah, it was a mess. So it was kind of like, you know, they might have been trudging or doing what they can to get through it. But yeah, like I said, if I'm not mistaken, they distorted the shit out of the drums on Alva Adore specifically. So
I want to talk about that, but after Rob, because that's getting into shape, wave shaping, and that's a K2000 thing. Wave shaping will blow your skull. Rob, talk to me.
Yeah, just a quick one. I go from tape. I do a shitty tape recording, and then I run the tape through a low bit sampler, and that is essentially bit crushing without having a bit crushing pedal. But if you've got more variable control on the tape and you can muck around a little bit with the sampler, I got that little Roland, which is from the 80s. It's awesome.
That's great. Thanks, man. It would be interesting to find out what version, like, is that MS1, is that like an S50 or an S30 or an S10 or something, a rack version of one of them?
It's a portable version, actually. But yeah, what the equivalence is, I think this was a predecessor to one of the racks. So it would be a simpler, crappier, humbler version, which is great for what you want it to do. If that's what you want.
Okay.
Crappy is good.
Crappy is very good. So Rob or someone or John, do me a favor, find out who produced Avlador. I thought it was the dude from, it may have been Butch Vig, but I thought it was one of the guys from Nitzareb did that. So fun fact, you'll notice if you listen to that album and a lot of albums of that time, they have that sound going on that really, it's this interesting buzzy distortion. Avlador, I always have trouble saying, was it Brad Wood? The fuck is Brad Wood?
yeah, it's AVA Adore.
Okay, cool, interesting. I thought it was the dude from Nitzareb. I could be wrong, because he did a whole bunch of albums. But anyway, I digress. A lot of those drums of that area, Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar, 9 Inch Nails, Downward Spiral, everything in that period is the K2000, which I did a Blipfert on because it's such a fucking phenomenally amazing synthesizer. Still. Anyway, so what they're doing is wave shaping. And Rob, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. Analog wave shaping is when they apply, and it's not just I'm going to move from square wave to sine wave to this. It's, that's the knob on your VCO that will do that. But when you look at things like the Doepfer A137 or the A136, which are the greatest distortions I've ever heard, they're actually going in, tracing the voltage, because it's a voltage thing, and they're saying when it gets to this when it gets to this height of the ramp, kind of like a compressor, instead of blocking it down, I'm going to flip everything else it does. Then when it gets back to that point, I'm going to flip it back again.
Yeah, so there's phase distortion and then there's inversion as well.
Right.
So you can invert the phase, so it flips it.
And obviously on the Doepfer stuff, that stuff's all voltage controlled. But the greatest distortion I have heard are those modules. And then, for the digital side of it, what the K2000 does as far as wave shaping and stuff, it doesn't have a whole bunch of different... It's got distortion, but it doesn't have a whole bunch of different distortions. Still stunning. I'm ranting too much. I'm glad Brent isn't here because we'd be having a huge K2000 rant. Alex? Bow, bow.
What I really like about the Doepfer one is that, as you said, if it reaches a certain level, it not only clips but folds it back into a negative. And it's really hard to make conscious adjustments, but you can somehow erase certain bands. And I don't know how you do it, but if you put a mix through it, you sometimes can make the bass disappear or some mids. I really like it, like on something that's really wide in the spectrum, and then just carve things out.
What are you using?
What do you mean?
Like for your waves, whatever this effect is, is it a plugin? Is it a module? What is it?
No. As you said, the A136.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
And they're also stellar because they will add, that's the Doepfer module, they will add high-end, low-end, speaker-destroying low-end to things that don't really have much bass. They're just madness. And it's funny that another thing I'm learning about it is that the closer to a sine wave your ingoing tone is, same with distortion, the more fuckage it can do. And it's all about fuckage.
Maybe it's just a percentage, because if there are no overtones, you can add in infinitely more.
Yeah.
But also it's asymmetrical, which is unusual, or it can be asymmetrical, which is unusual, because for the upper, you have an upper limit and a lower limit, and you can dial them in separately, so you can make asymmetrical waves.
Yeah. So that's the 137. Do you have the 136?
I have the 136, I think, yeah.
All right, so it's the 137. The 136 is broader. You can do crazy stuff with it. The 137, you can control the harmonic amount, the fuckage amount, and it's got 4 different bands of fuckage that you can control, and it's just madness. And the other wild thing about it is the higher the volume you put into it, the more it's going to ruin it. But once again, a lesson I'm learning constantly is that even with a filter, if you distort the input too much, the filter doesn't have room to work. Because when you start overdriving it, it's the same with a lot of these guys as well. You limit its ability to do its job. Just something I've noticed.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, because you can add much more flavor to the filter if you just drive it a bit. So you have to. That's like another dial, how hot it goes into the filter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why the series matters. This before that before this. That actually matters with filters.
Okay, I'm learning a lot today. Does anybody else have any amazing idea that they want to throw in there?
I was going to ask about the K2000. Do you have a rack mount version, or do you have a keyboard version? And if so, which one does have the sampler in it, Carl?
I actually have both, and it's a funny story. I bought the rack mount in the early 90s, and it cost me $5,000. And then I bought the sampler in Chicago, and it cost me $200, like 20 years later. And I had a third one, but it was given to me, and I then gifted it on to a group of people. But they both have the sampling option on them, and it's what's great about the K2000 is that it's got a brutality to it. I did a blipvert on it. It's such a good synth. It has a brutality to it, and you can apply. So, okay, Kurzweil was trying to license all these different filter sorts, and they were trying to license from Yamaha the frequency modulation thing in their DX7, and Yamaha said, no, we're not going to give it to you. So Ray Kurzweil, being the genius that he is, came up with his own. And a lot of people, myself included, think it's better. It's way easier. And it's just got to do with fuckage. And what's great about the K2000 is that the original thing was, we're going to start with a sine wave and using high pass, low pass bandwidth, one of the best low passes I've ever heard. Like, it's a digital filter, and then all of these other things like pulse width modulation, but not pulse width modulation like you used to. This is off the chart. Sync modulation, sync M, all of these things that are like, and you can apply them to the wavetables that are already in the K2000, which are great. For the 90s, they're great. But then you can apply the algorithms of a DX7 to a sample. So you can shred frequencies, absolutely destroy frequencies by, hold on, I think I've got, give me a minute. Oh, there's my live. Mixing the Angelspit way. Hi, that's my, so everybody watching this is now looking at my my list
Hamster.
of blip vids. Looking at my hamster. Hold on. Don't run away. Okay. Boom. Okay, so here's a link to the... Come on. Work for me. Work for me! Jesus Christ. I hate my life. This is the blip that I did on the K2000. I want to punch my... We're going to try that again. Come on. You can do it. Boom! Okay, so that's the blip that I did on the K2000. And I barely touch what this synth does. It's just madness. It's madness. And the great thing about it is there's 3 blocks, and you can say, well, I'm going to have a distortion here, a wave shaping here, and then a filter here. So and that filter is going to be a high pass filter. So I'm going to take everything below 150 hertz out of that thing because it's screaming. I blew up speakers in Jekyll Switch. Jekyll Switch was me with a K2000. I blew up more speakers than I could remember because the bass that the K2000 outputs popped. So many big 15, 18-inch speakers just popped them out of place. And it's quite fucking brutal. But it's a great sampler. Oh, dude, you've got one. Oh, you've got the manuals.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm old school. I have trouble looking at computers too much, so sometimes it's good to get into the manuals.
So
I have the keyboard, sampler keyboard, but a buddy of mine who has a recording studio, he was offloading a lot of gear, and I got his old 2000 rack unit with discs and manuals, and I thought, for that price, I'm getting it. It's not the sampler version rack, so I'm like, should I sell this or should I keep it? But I'm definitely keeping the discs and the manuals because I want to go through and master it.
Yeah, I'll keep it. But the thing about it is either replace the drive with one of those USB drives because it reads WAV files and just sample. What I always do is sample on my computer, clean it up on my computer, then stick it in the K2000.
Pop it in.
I never sample off the keyboards because I'm a very lazy man. Mm-hmm. I'm not like hardcore enough, but definitely.
And I did get those files that you sent out earlier. You made some samples for the K2000.
Cool.
So yeah, cool stuff. I'm still learning.
They're beautiful samples. Sorry, John.
Super quick on the subject of older sampling keyboards and being diskette based. What as opposed to newer ones in the future, but whatever. Point being, disk-based systems, because I grew up with an Ensoniq EPS system, the 2.40, that particular generation. It was before the 16, but yeah, there is a replacement kit that like you can still get for like $80. But it swaps out the floppy disk drive for a more modern USB thumb drive, basically. And I would not be shocked if there was those. Though the problem with floppy disks is, I mean, they're magnetic media and they have, a high failure rate. Same with also CDs, like any of those burned CDs that anybody has from like the 90s and 2000s, like good fucking luck. It's going to be a crapshoot reading from them. If you haven't archived them out, elsewhere, might want to revisit that. Yeah. Not ragging on them. Point being, it's like I got my own stack. The problem is things go bad.
Yes.
Yeah, I got some of these SCSI dongles. They're fun too, where you just stick the SD in it or USB and it goes in the SCSI port.
Oh, that's slick. I've never seen one of those.
Yeah. Oh, 01. Nice one.
I've got what was that?
He's got the Korg 01 floppies.
Dude. Fucking the 01Ws, mate. Jesus, what a trick. I've actually got let me wank for a second. I've got somewhere.
How is this different? Sorry.
Fuck you. I've got in here somewhere. Where is it?
I do have the SD floppy replacement drives. I've got one in my Yamaha EX5, and I got one that I bought for the for the Korg, but I haven't put it in yet in the Triton. But I kind of like using the floppies. I'm old school.
Yeah. Dude, I've got the Led Zeppelin drums and everything, but I've got the analog, the K2000 analog sounds. And that track, that album we were talking about before, Viva l'Amour, I can never say it right, is full of that, the analog new age floppy, which I really should make and send you a copy of.
That would be awesome.
Oh,
I do have
so
a ton. Good. I do have a ton on my computer.
It's the analog emulation where they built from like a sine wave, a sawtooth, a ramp wave. Some of the sounds on these sounds better than I own a fucking Jupiter 8, and the Jupiter 8s on this, they're really good. They're really good.
I have the first ROM in my keyboard, and it has the old analog synth set standard.
Wow.
And it completely blows away my other synths. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But that's the K2000. So, my gear acquisition thing for the day is, if you ever have a chance, definitely replace the drive with a fucking USB. But K2000s is just, because if I want to do a sound track that sounds like the Downward Spiral. The Downward Spiral is the K2000. Frontline Assemblies, Millennium, Livewire, all that stuff, all that early mid-90s, it's just K2000. It's the sound. It's such a good synth. Unfortunately, people are learning this now and the fucking prices are going up. But, anyway, there you go. Sorry, I was reminiscing.
So when you use samplers, Carl, do you use it to do non-real-time fuckage, or do you try to program the instrument to produce sound in real time? What is the balance that you do?
How do you mean sound? Do you mean like actually flying controllers and stuff to?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Excuse me. That's the great thing about the K2000 is that, for its age, there's a lot you can do with the MIDI controllers. Excuse me. There's a lot. So you can start a sound that is not destroyed like a regular sound, and then as the song progresses, the amount of fuckage on that goes and goes and goes and goes. So by the end of the track, that sound is quite distorted or quite fucked up. I do MIDI controllers on the cutoff of the filters on that thing. I just like, it's got this 4-pole. The 4-pole low pass on the K2000 will ruin speakers. It's so terrifying. I do a lot on the Emax as well, but the Emax has really only two MIDI controllers, and there's not too much you can do on the Emax, like really filter kind of volume. But with the K2000, it can be the resonance, the sync amount, all of this stuff you can change. And it's a big spiel in itself is programming with controllers like on your synth, finding out, like, Mark, I'm looking at your Arturia stuff, and I know that so many of the parameters of those synthesizers are controllable, so do it. And it's fun that since I've got the Rev 2, I'm trying to get into the habit, because as you can tell, like, shit gets so complicated. But I've learned that the trick is you assign it to the mod wheel or to one controller source. And instead of it going, I'm going to do this now, it's just that one simple movement to push all of the little things towards fuckage. I've just learned, unless it's like one sound doing the entire song, but if it's your bass line, for example, your fucking mod wheel might be the filter opening and the amount going to distortion, and also throwing certain oscillators out of pitch. I have a sample on the K2000 that I need to make public, and it's every analog filter in the studio oscillator firing off.
Okay, I'm going to nerd out with you now, Carl.
Let's
I've
go.
got this really wacky idea. I got this old DMX controller board. It's like a computer PC, like an XT 286 or something like that inside. But it's got like 188 controllers on it. And it's all DMX, and it's got MIDI control as well. And it's like, I want to use that as my sound creation master board. So I've got basically 100 or more mod wheels to play with, to play all of the synths all at once.
That sounds incredible, because when you're doing stuff like that with the sliders, you might be saying this is going to be controller 7 to MIDI channel 1, this will be controller 7 to MIDI channel 2, and these are going to be my filter amounts and other things. So you can be creating this, and that's really, really cool as well, because you could have a sound that's like this shakunga, shakunga, shakunga sample, and you just bring up the filter on it or something. That's fantastic. I love that.
It's the project is I'm taking the DMX 256 protocol out of the board, and I'm using a Raspberry Pi to convert it to MIDI.
Wow.
And then push the MIDI out across my little MIDI network here to make fuckage.
I love that. That's great.
That's one of my Frankenstein projects.
No, that's brilliant. I'm all about that. Does anybody else have something cool they want to add, or a Frankenstein project, or a question about old vintage samplers?
Rose has something.
Shoot, Rose.
All right. So it's sort of off the topic, but not really, because it kind of combines both topics. Since we were talking about drum machines, we were talking about performing live, all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to show you guys an option that you might not know about, because most people that I talk to about it are surprised that it exists. And I might even have brought it up before. Anyway, so I want to introduce you guys to my drummer.
Yes.
This is my drummer right here, which is always very shocking to people, because they're like, okay, I see there's a guitarist, there's a bassist, there's a vocalist, where's your drummer? Especially because we play very heavy music, they're expecting the drummer, and they're like, what? And then they're always like, later on after the show, they're always like, I thought I was going to suck, but actually, like, I totally forgot about it, because you guys' show is like really active and really fun. So anyway, what this guy does is, it uses this is where the smart card is. It's just like a little tiny smart card, like you let those in your phone, and that's where you load on either waves or MP3s, and and then this switch up here. Let's see. Hopefully, it doesn't get spaced out. This one controls like what the volume is over here. And then these are the tracks right in the middle. It's super simple. It's very honestly, this is like caveman compared to the kind of stuff that a lot of you seem to do and stuff when you control your drums. I come from like DIY. I'm a little bit punk rock. So I wanted something I couldn't handle. I tried doing the laptop thing and I couldn't do it. Like it was just, it hurt my soul a little bit. So I was like, okay, I need something that's like super easy and like dead simple, like dumb, like just as dumb as it can be, right? And so yeah, literally, like there's this goes up to 12, right? This is 12 tracks, and then here is banks. So then you have banks also. So each of these, so it really can do way more than 12 tracks. It's 12 times, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 12 times 8. It's a lot. It can hold a lot of drum tracks in here. So you can literally put your whole discography in here. And if you wanted to, say you have like one album or whatever, and it's also easy to have like you can totally have like a copy of all of those things on another smart card, which is exactly what I do, which is what you should do. Always have a backup for your backups. Like I literally have everything on here, and then I also have a Google Drive so that should the worst occur, I actually have all those drum tracks in a Google Drive, and if I had to, I could do it off my phone. You know what I mean? Like I just never want to be in a situation again where, if you guys were at the chat that that we had last time, I literally my drum tracks at that time were controlled by a keyboard and a sampler, and something one of the other bands just screwed up something in our setup so badly that we couldn't access any of the drums. Like, the drums were just assigned to, like, it just changed the routing of like where the drum samples were going and stuff. So everything sounded like insane and weird. So we're like, screw it, we're gonna just do it without drums. I was like, never am I gonna let this happen to me again. So I always have backups on backups on backups. But yeah, and like you see right here, this is how you arm it. You like tap it and hold it, and that arms it, and then you tap it again and it starts it, and then you just use the little knob to switch each track. And I have my guitarist actually control this instead of me, because I don't think it's a cute look as the front person, the person that's in the front, to be like bending down and like pressing this and doing that. Like, I love foot pedals and I love barbaric simplicity, and yeah, this thing is really sturdy. It's like metal body, so it's really nice. It's just like any like guitar pedal, and it's super duper duper small. It takes a pretty generic, I already lost the power supply that it came with, but it takes a super generic power supply, so it's very easy to replace the power supply. So I ended up buying two just in case. So just in case, I have one in my purse, I have one in the gig bag, so that just in case somehow I forgot to pack it into the gig bag or whatever, I always have a backup. You can, especially if it has like a real generic power supply, always have doubles. You know what I mean? That's also keeps you from having to rely on like batteries and making sure that battery is charged, all that stuff. So I know this is a little simpler, but just in case, if anybody was curious about a solution like this, because I was basically looking around, I was like, how can I not do this laptop thing? Because it's not for me. And this was really the jam for me, and it makes me happy and it works. So I see that John has a question, so I'm going to give it to you, buddy.
Hey, no, that's awesome. I just want to actually reinforce it. Anybody who says something like drum machines have no souls, or like, having a backing track like that is, selling out, fuck you. Like, it's, it's pragmatic. Drum machines or a playback system doesn't get drunk, shows up on time. You can have a backup of it. And as someone who's had laptops crash or computer systems like screw up during gigs or like prior to it, or it's like, oh, I know completely how to set up everything. It's bulletproof. Then you get there in the venue and it's dark, it's cramped, it's chaotic, it's loud, and you're doing load in like after somebody else's set. And so it's like, it's not a perfect situation. It's like, bulletproof is simple. And same thing, like if you have like an Ableton or DAW, type based configuration, even if you're not using a Stompbox or something like that, or in this case, it's basically, Stompbox, right. I'm blanking on words. Words are hard. The form factor, that's the word. It's like, it makes it super convenient. But like if you're using like a DAW type system, bounce down. You don't want to like be dealing with like your entire effects system going through processing it in real time, especially if you're trying to save on CPU, and also like more moving parts, more problems. So yeah, keep it simple. Alex, you got your hand up.
Yes, well, if you have backing tracks, it might also be a good idea to just have like an MP3 player with your WAV files inside, and a cable from mini jack to the big jack, just to have in case something breaks for you in your playback system. So I think that's a cheap solution that could save your life if you play live.
That's awesome. Yes. And something you might want to consider as well, because most venues are mono, or they're so small stereo you're not going to hear it. I'm going to assume that your little doobie is Rose. Your little doobie is stereo, Rose.
It's mono.
It is? Okay, cool. What I was going to say is that if it is stereo, do all drums on the left track and the kick only on the right track, and send that to the engineer. But one problem with that is you need to make sure that the engineer's good, because if, you know, I've met some engineers that are not good at all. And I think that's why I do every single thing comes off the stage, possibly as a really simple mix. Because every time I look at the engineer, I'm going, I can't hear myself in my speaker. They're doing this. Every time. And you know, that's just got worse. But I don't know. I think that's a fantastic idea. I love it. Fucking 5 Shades of Red. And I should... One problem I have is because when I go out live, I use MIDI to DMX sync the lights. So I want to use my phone, but the problem with my phone is audio and a MIDI synchronized, like a MIDI track that's DMX controlling the lights. I have to use a laptop because I don't have anything. I don't have an option for that. Although I do, actually. I'm lying. And my God, I hate laptops so much. Oh God, playing live. Oh God. So does anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Or with 7 minutes left, we can wrap this bad boy up.
One thing, if you guys decide to try out this particular solution, what I do recommend is that your drum tracks, make sure, what happened to me was I introduced 2 new songs recently in shows, and make sure that when you mix those drums, that you use the other drums that you have as a reference, you know, so that way they're all the same. They're all the same level. Because I found out that the new tracks were mixed a little bit lower, so then it caused a little bit of chaos at the show. And then I didn't have time to like fix it before the show after that, which also still had those new tracks. So I just told the sound person, I was like, look, song 3 and song 5, the drums are a little bit lower. Just know that, like, just, hey, you know, just put them up and then make sure to put them right back down for the next song. And they were accommodating and they were nice about it and stuff. I was like, hey, you know, sorry, but hey, at least you didn't have to do all the setup for a live drummer, and all you have to worry about is this one little thing. So what you got to say, John?
It's a final thought. Eric, go first.
Thanks. I just wanted to add what John was saying, and Alex, bounce your tracks down if you're using your laptop or you're doing stuff. It uses, obviously, we all know, a lot of CPU, and the last thing you want is your CPU or something fucking up when you're playing live. So if you have your track bounced down, much easier, and bounce it down in mono. And Carl was saying left and right. I've never done it that way. I never even thought about that. That's pretty cool. But I've always had backing tracks and bounce them down always mono, because the odds of the venue you're playing having stereo are very slim, and you're going to be missing sounds and it's not going to sound full. And then the MP3, I used to play like that for a bit just by myself. I would bounce down my tracks in mono, take out the keyboard part or the synth part I wanted to play live and sing, and I would just put it on an MP3. I think with the solo performer having a laptop up there, for me, it's too distracting and too much. So I had literally an MP3 player duct taped onto my keyboard or on my synth, on my controller, and then I would play the live keyboard parts to each song I wanted in the song with the back and bounce down in mono on a MP3 player, and it was pretty convenient and very minimal hardware that can go wrong.
Awesome. Thanks, man. John, what are your closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are a message that my daughter left me, and I discovered this as I was cleaning my desk. So, for you, Carl.
I have poo-poo.
I love poo-poo.
Fantastic. That's lovely. Thank you so much. And with that amazingness, we're going to call it, and we're going to now stream on over to MTV TV. Thank you one and all for joining us. This has been the best fucking fun ever, and there's been a lot of information here, and we've all had a damn fine time. Bye. See you next week. You're the best. Bye. This time next week, we're making crazes. Bye. Bye.